This is the video for Friday, August the 14th. And the McClellan oscillator, look at the density in here. Most of it above the zero line, only dropping below the zero line for this little short period of time. But look how it compares to the density back here and the density back here. And this is when the market was just sort of trending upwards slowly. A little pullback, trending upwards slowly. But you just had it continually rising, but only by a small amount each day. Unlike the wild swings that you saw in the McClellan oscillator when we had the steep coronavirus drop and the V-shaped recovery. This isn't quite as dense as the pattern back here in 2019, which may signal more in terms of going flat as opposed to continuing to drift up. But if we take a closer look at all the McClellan numbers, we can see that the oscillator now has been steadily moving down all week. The summation index has taken a little bit of a turn down as well, because if you look at the oscillator, we went from on the 10th, which was Monday, we went from 114 down to 86, up to 98, down to 45, down to 27. So that's the steady downward motion towards the zero line. The volume was extremely weak. We haven't seen a low volume day like that since the beginning of the year. So right since COVID started, right till now, we haven't seen this type of low volume, continually decreasing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the advancers led the decliners, but only by a little bit. So now let's take a look at some weekly charts. Let's start off with the volatility index. The volatility on a weekly basis continues to drop. Meaning what? Meaning there's no fear. People aren't buying puts. People aren't trying to protect what they're holding on to. Let's take a look at the Dow Jones. Let's take a look at the S&P, because the S&P was the one we were looking at to double top, and it sure looks like it double top. This 100% is its all-time high, which occurred on both of these days back here on February 13th. And this green line is actually the closing high, so the highest that the Dow has ever closed. And we've failed to close at a point, well, let's look at it on a daily basis. We have failed to close higher than the previous closing high the last 3 days. So 4 days in a row now where we've come close, touched that line, and pulled back all the time. We still have not hit the 100% all-time high. So, my theory is that the S&P is going to continue to churn a little bit, and it may be waiting for the Dow Jones to catch up. Because here's the Dow Jones on a weekly basis. Now, it finished off of its high, but if we look at it on a daily basis, it was moving up on Monday, and then it just sort of went sideways for 4 days. But it's still got a ways to go. It's looking for like 931 to, we've still got 2,000 points that we, 2,000 points that we need in the Dow. So there's quite a ways for the Dow to go. The NASDAQ, on the other hand, had this kind of a week where it traded down to the 138, it traded above the 150, and ended sort of closer to the 150 than the 138. Apple looked like it was going to have a pretty bad day. It started off on a downward trend, went down to 435. No particular reason for support there. If we look at the Ichimoku cloud, we're not going to see, let's go and look at it on a daily basis, we're not going to see any reasons there either. So we're still struggling to get to 138.2%, but it did finish the day on a high, and it finished the week having touched the 227 extended Fibonacci. NVIDIA cruising around the 200%. Caterpillar fell on a weekly basis below this trend line. Now we saw on a daily basis, we had 2 days where we were above this trend line, but on a weekly basis, the trend line was more important in keeping Caterpillar down. Home Depot, still a strong stock. It's like NVIDIA, just sort of creating a handle pattern here. If we look at some of its Fibonacci's, we have this 138.2% on the drop starting a coronavirus drop. AT&T, now that's a 7% dividend stock. Let's look at it on a weekly basis. Nothing really to scream about. It was looking pretty good at one point. It was up to 30.75, but on a weekly basis, it pretty much pulled all the way back, closer to its low. Whirlpool, still a great stock. On a daily basis, it's moving higher. On a weekly basis, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row where it's gained significantly on its way to 216.46. So that's going to be all for today, for the weekend. Are we going to look at anything else down here? Let's just take a look at the banks. Let's look at the banks on a weekly basis, where the Bank of America finished up. Goldman Sachs a little bit, no, finished lower. JP Morgan finished higher on a weekly basis, but down off of its highs. Wells Fargo continues to suck. US Bank on a weekly basis, just pretty much been a flat line. There was an article on CNBC saying that it's an undervalued bank with a pretty reasonable dividend. That didn't seem to move the stock at all. And Citigroup, much the same as US Bank, just sort of flatlining, getting rejection at 38.2%. So the banks aren't leading the way. Let's take a look. One last thing. Let's just see on a weekly basis what sectors were the strongest. And for that, we're going to go to FinViz, and we're going to look at this big chart here. But we're going to take a look at it not on a daily basis, but we're going to look at it on a weekly basis. So the 1 week performance has your consumer cyclicals pretty green, your industrials pretty green, your utilities, which are your safe dividend stocks, pretty much all down, and your technology stocks are a mixture of green and red. So that's on a weekly performance, and that's the S&P 500. If we look at a monthly performance, we've had a pretty good last 30 days. There isn't really a weak sector in there other than perhaps you'd say biotechnology, but consumer cyclical, consumer defensive, technology, all very strong. If we look on a world basis and just take a look at the world for a week, really the market that struggled the most, forget about South America, but the market that seemed to struggle the most was Canada. The others were sort of green to flat. Let's look at, there we go. So that's it for today. Sorry to ramble. I just think that the S&P is going to run flat. Watch the Dow stocks. Maybe outperform the S&P and the NASDAQ in the next week or so. But we are heading to the slowest trading period of the year, which is the the last 10 days of August.